Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very pleased to be here. This is really exciting to be doing this across all the time zones. And great to see everyone as part of this summer school. I saw the agenda for the last few days. It looks really interesting. So I hope that you've had a great time. We have, I guess, about 3 hours today. And I think what we'd like to do is maybe take the first a little bit of time. I'd just like to get to know some of you a little bit. This is a topic on education. I know you've had other topics over the last couple of days. And so that we're taking a little bit of a shift into a slightly different direction. We're going into something that's quite near and dear to my heart in terms of how we're looking at education. And I could tell you just a little bit about how this works for me. You know, I'm a sustainability guy. I've been working in sustainability for 16 years and well, actually longer than that, but 16 years in higher education. And so what I'm seeing is that the collapsing of the operational side and the educational side, it really is coming together. It used to be that the operations people, they did their job, and the faculty members, they did their job, but they didn't really cross over very much. But I think that what I've been seeing from the perspective of sustainability is that in order to really provide the right kinds of educational opportunities for students, you have to bring that together, right? Because when the students, all of you are learning something in the classroom, then you need to be able to walk outside the classroom and see those kinds of ideas taking place, right? If you don't see that, then it really undermines the whole educational component, especially with sustainability. So I've gotten very involved in the educational side. This last year and a half has really also shined a very bright spotlight on some of the practices that we have that I would say are probably not sustainable. And they probably haven't been for many, many years. And so we can talk about that too. You know, so all of our schools, we jumped right into online learning, you know, almost immediately with just a couple of months notice, or just a couple of weeks notice, really. And so, and we all made that transition. And so we all proved that we can do things like what we're doing today. I can be in Hong Kong, you could be in Europe, you can, and maybe some of you are in Africa, and we could still have a very good civil dialogue and a great discussion. And I don't think that we would have been having these kinds of conversations 2 years ago. We would have expected us all to be in the same place. So it is providing a lot of good potential for us to be able to exchange ideas in ways that we hadn't done before. So that's quite good. So I guess let me just start by sharing some slides, and then we can start a little bit of a dialogue, if that's okay with you. Oh, there it is. Okay. Oops. So let me try this again. I think that's better. All right, can everyone see my screen okay? Yeah, okay, so this is where we started. This was the program and the introduction for us today. So I understand this is the fifth of your workshops, so I'm sure you guys are ready for this to all come to an end. So I hope that I can entertain you just enough to be able to pay attention to today. But today we're really focusing, like I said, on the education side. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am, you might look at me and say, well, he doesn't look very Chinese, which is true. I'm not. I was born and raised in the United States. And I moved to mainland China in the mid-1990s because I was interested, and it was very different from what I was used to in the United States. And I really enjoyed it. I met some really terrific people. And there was a lot for me to really appreciate about Chinese culture and Chinese people and Chinese food, of course. And I really felt great. I signed up for a 1-year contract. I renewed for a 2nd year. And at that point, I changed my focus. I was really I was teaching actually American literature and composition studies. And when I spent 2 years in China, I found that I did like teaching. But the one thing I noticed about China at that time, it's a little different now, but in the 1990s, is that it was a beautiful country that was drowning in pollution and trash. And I thought, this is something that maybe I can do something about. So I went back to the United States and I went to school and I changed my major and I got a different degree in international resource management, and ended up going into the Washington, D.C. for about 6 years working on international policies. And right about then, I noticed that there was this term called sustainability. It was starting to be kicked around. Some people in the developing international development context were talking about sustainable development. It was a whole new term of how do we go into poor countries and we try to help them develop in a more sustainable way, because up until then there was a lot of problems. But people hadn't really thought about it in terms of what do we do, how do we use these principles for rich countries too, or developed, we call them developed countries. Those terms don't mean quite as much today as they did 20 or 30 years ago. So this term was getting kicked around. I started to really focus on that. And I realized that some of the things that I'd learned from the business, I was in a kind of a law and a business program. And I realized that a lot of those business principles could be applied to addressing environmental issues, right? And before then, environmental issues were all being addressed by environmentalists who were, well-meaning, and they were very enthusiastic, but many of them were science-based. And so in order to solve the issues, sometimes they weren't really the right, they didn't really have the right kind of skill set. And I realized that taking a business approach and looking at how you manage projects, that could be quite helpful in trying to deal with some of these very difficult environmental problems. So I was, as I said, I was in Washington, D.C. for 6 years. I started to work on these issues, and I left and I started a consulting company helping businesses work on sustainable business plans. And I was in the area where there was a very large employer called Johns Hopkins University. And I thought, well, I'm going to go get them as a client. So I went to knock on the door and I met with them and I said, you're a big university, you're a prestigious university, and you don't have a sustainability plan. And shame on you for that. You should. And I can help you do that. And so I gave them my pitch and they said, no, thank you. So they turned me down, but then they came back and they said, you know what, we don't really want to hire a consultant. What we'd really like to do is we'd like to build a new office. So would you be willing to come and be the founding director of a new office of sustainability? So I said, yeah, sure. So I gave up my consulting business and then I joined Johns Hopkins full-time and started their program. So I was there about 8 years, and then I started to kind of keep thinking about Asia. I had had such a good experience in China. I kept thinking if I had a chance to come back to Asia, I'd like to. And right about then, I found that this university, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, was also starting to really want to move aggressively into sustainability. So they got in touch with me and we talked about it and it made sense. So 8 years ago, I came to HKUST and we started the program here. So we now have a new office. It's called the Sustainability Net Zero Office. We just changed the name because we really want to emphasize net zero carbon, but not just net zero carbon, but net zero waste, net zero water. It really emphasizes the idea that we have to live within our means. So it's fine to use water, and in Hong Kong, it's actually fine to use a lot of water because it rains a lot, but you should never use more water than can be replenished. It's okay to use electricity, but don't use any more electricity than can be replenished naturally. So that's the whole net zero idea. I also have an appointment in the Division of Environment and Sustainability. So that's gives me a great way to straddle both sides. I work with the operations people and I work with academics. So that's a little bit of a unique situation. Most people don't have that. But I'm very fortunate that I can really kind of straddle both sides. So before we get too much further, I'd like to hear about all of you, and maybe some of you, I don't know how many people are on the Zoom call today, so I don't know if it's okay, but let's just try. If you have a thought, you can either raise your hand, you can hit the raise hand function, or if you would like to just unmute yourself and speak up. If there are too many people, then maybe we'll do the raise hand, but until then, so I guess if someone could just volunteer, tell me a little bit about, like, who are you and what is it about sustainability education that you know about or that you're interested in?
Is it too early in the morning here in Europe? I don't know.
Is it too early?
I don't know.
All right, let's start with something very easy. All right, just pop in and just tell me who you are and why you decided to join this summer school. So Shipra.
Hello. I hope I'm audible and it's not noisy on the outside. Yeah. Good morning. I am Shipra. I am originally from India, but currently I'm pursuing my master's in energy science and technology from ETH Europe. And so, though my background is in electrical engineering, and then I decided that I would rather want to go for a specialization in energy science. So that's why I came here. And my reason for joining the summer school was definitely, I mean, like, so sustainability is definitely at the core of what I'm studying, and to build like sustainable energy systems and do something for a problem that is very much visible in the world today. And so my motivation about joining the school was to basically learn more what we can do even at the campus level, and how we can also combine like the knowledge of various stakeholders and basically look at the subject from all of the different aspects, like technology as well as policy. So that was my main motivation, and that's what I'm trying to do with the help of courses as well, and wanted to add to it as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you, and thank you for being the first. That's great. That's always the hardest one, so I really appreciate it. Well done, thank you. How about Martina? I see you have your hand up.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Martina Mani. I'm a student of management engineering from Politecnico di Milano. And I've always been engaged in the topic of sustainability. But before 1 semester ago, I had never gone in detail in the practical and technical aspects. Then I did a project at the premises of an Italian energy company to help companies to achieve the sustainable transition. And I really I was really fascinated by all the possible solutions, like energy efficient solution for buildings or greener technologies for transport, etc. And therefore, I decided to make an application for this school. But I rose my hand because I have something in common with you, because in September, I'm going to study in China, unfortunately for the first semester remotely. But since I'm interested in this topic of sustainability, I would like to ask you some suggestions, some advices of how I can better study this area in China, because I'm going to study in a business school, and unfortunately there are not sustainability lectures that I can study. So maybe if I can study something else, something different, or join some associations, I will be in Shanghai.
You'll be in Shanghai. Okay, that's good. Well, I hope you can go. I know it's very difficult to go into China today, but let's hope that Yeah, let's hope that even for us right here in Hong Kong, it's very, very difficult to go into China right now. So anyway, I hope you can get there at least in the spring. That would be great. All right, well, so we'll look into that some more. And I know there's some people on the call who could probably give you some very specific advice about China, studying in China as well. So Victor, I see your hand is up.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Victor. I am a student. I'm just starting my doctoral program at TU Delft.
Okay.
And my research topic is about university campuses during the Cold War in Latin America. Yeah, and why I was interested in these summer classes, it is because part of the research focused on the fact that when university campuses were built during the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, natural resources were supposed to be endless. Not anymore.
Yeah.
And at the end of the research, it is supposed that we are going to approach on what went wrong and what could we do better this time, now that we are aware of the relevance of sustainability. And also because there is something really important to consider. At the current moment, we are 262 million people studying in universities all over the world. So it is a lot of people. And if we can make somehow for students to live, to experience sustainability during the times we are in school, which is in average 5 years, then we can really make a change. Well, that's it.
Did you say 260 million people?
262 million according to UNESCO.
Wow.
UNESCO science reports. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. Good. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that really points to why, I think that leads in very well into what we'll talk about today, which is how, the whole education system needs to adapt to this rapidly changing awareness of what the world is. We don't have unlimited resources. We used to think that the world was so huge, you could put your trash into the ocean and it was just too big to make a difference. But of course, we know differently now. We thought that the sky was so vast that a smokestack would make no difference. But of course, now we know that that's not true. So we have to relearn some of these. So Paola, how about you?
So good morning to all. I'm Paola, and I'm a computer science engineer. But after more than 10 years working in ICT, in a university ICT office, I started an executive PhD on data science, just because we would like to, we would like to use the university data to improve the quality of lifestyle in the campus of Politecnico di Milano. And I joined this summer school because I think that improving the quality of lifestyle includes sustainability and a better use of resources. So that's why I'm here.
That's great. I think that people forget that improving lifestyle is really the centerpiece of sustainability. I think people think about renewable energy and about climate change, but the reason why we care about those is because those things impact our quality of life. So, yeah. So Yashuen.
Hello, Professor Davis. I'm a PhD student in Hong Kong UST, and my major is atmospheric environmental science. For me to read a PhD, I think the motivation is, I hope I can contribute. And then I hope my research is not just research. It can be understood by the public and help public to improve their life quality. So I think for a researcher, we just work on the research part, and then how to make our research result understood by the public. We need a bridge. So I think the bridge is something about education and the communication. So for sustainability, the final goal, we hope the public can change their behavior and help the public to improve the environment. And from the research result and between the research result and the final goal, the public can change their behavior. In the middle, we need a very fundamental step. That is the education part. So I think that's the importance of the sustainability education.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Well, so it's interesting that some of you, so I know that you're in a PhD program, so you will be teaching at some point. So the education component. For some of others of you that we're talking, like Shipra and Martina, I don't know if you're going into the teaching route, but the education sounds like it's still quite important. So, yeah. All right, let's do two more, and then we'll wrap it up and get into some topics. So Ayush, we'll do Ayush and then Carlo.
So I'm an architect, and now I'm doing my master's, and I'm focusing on sustainability and nearly zero energy buildings for my master's studies. So
oh, great.
The course is known as the building engineering. So after design, I thought it was too generic and subjective for me to approach a building just from the design and aesthetic point of view. And the primary permanent point that I wanted in my design was the sustainability part, to make them, let's say, green. So I chose this course to have that technical background so that the building can be like, there could be like a big backing or a reason of whatever is being built. And I primarily want my focus, and I'm like researching towards the climatic context of the global south, because I think, and this is true, that those will be the major infrastructural hotspots in the near future. It has already started now. The cities are more or less settled here in the western and the northern part. So I'm researching and trying to understand those climatic contexts more. And simultaneously and parallelly, I'm researching on the upcoming construction technologies of 3D printing and robotic fabrication and all from a sustainability point of view. How much is the potential they can hold, whether it is sustainably viable from an environmental point of view to scale up those technologies to become the mainstream technologies of the 21st century, in the second half of the 21st century or not. So this is what I'm up to now.
Okay, great. Well, you picked some great topics to be looking into. That's for sure. Great. Thank you, Ayush. How about Carlo?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Italian. Here in Italy is almost 10 o'clock. So good morning. And I'm studying chemical engineering at Politecnico here in Italy. And I've also been attending the honors program, which is giving me the opportunity to spend additional credits in courses related to sustainability and digitalization in the process industry. So that's why I'm here. And I've been enjoying the school so far. And I'm looking forward to hearing from your perspective, Davis, because you are American and you currently live in China, and those countries are probably the ones which are polluting the most our planet. And so it's really interesting to know your perspective, to hear from you.
Yeah, great. I went from one very large emitting country to another very large emitting country. So yeah, between the two, I think we probably have it covered. All right, thank you very much. I wish we had time to talk to all of you. You guys are fascinating, and I'd love to continue. All right, let's try to get a sense of how we are in terms of what we think about sustainability, and this might help me a little bit as well. So what I'd like you to do right now is just take a look at these pictures, and in the chat box, what I'd like you to do is just pick one of these pictures, just one that you feel like best represents sustainability to you. Now, there's no right or wrong answers, they're all fine. But what you might find is one of them is maybe a little bit closer to your heart, or one is a picture that makes you think a little bit more about the word sustainability. So yeah, so go ahead and just put. Go ahead and put that into the chat. And I will. Okay. So quite a variety. So not all the same one. That's good. Vegetables, local produce. Yeah. Renewable energy. Yeah, some of you were talking about the energy. Buddha. All right, this is great. So it looks like you have quite a few. I think almost all of them have been picked. We picked the renewable energy. We picked the crops. The boy, the Buddha, the girl kissing the tree. These are all. So maybe if you don't mind, if it's all right with you, maybe I'll just call on a couple. You tell me why you picked. So Vipath, piggyback
Yes.
kid. I'm sorry if I didn't
Yeah,
pronounce it.
I hope you can hear me.
I can. Yep. So why the piggyback kid?
Well, I think because the end goal of sustainability is that it is a rewarding process, but also at the end, we live in harmony with nature. And here, the happiness on the face of both the older the boy and the younger boy, it shows this harmony very clearly about their lives being fulfilling and happy in a way that they can connect with nature better, and also like this symbiotic relationship with nature that like you said, we make sure that nature replenishes itself.
Right.
And that is what really clicked to me in that photo. Yeah.
Great. I'm glad that you picked that one. You know, this one in particular, I took this picture every year, well, except for this year and last year. Usually I take a group of students to Cambodia, and we go to this is an orphanage. So that boy lost both of his parents to HIV. All of the kids there have lost their parents to HIV. And in fact, he may even have HIV. They certainly don't tell you if they do. They're all taking medication. They're all perfectly happy and healthy. The thing that I've always found so amazing about going here is that it really does exactly what you're just saying. I see these kids and I think to myself, if I was living in one of the poorest countries in the world without my parents, I would think that I would just be very depressed, but I always come away inspired. These kids are the most full of life. They're so happy. They love to play. They just, and when our students go down there, I can tell the students go down there ready to be almost like coddling them, like, oh, you poor children, you're so disadvantaged. And they come away thinking, wow, I was completely missed that, is this connection between happiness and human contact and being together. And that base form of emotion is so powerful. And so I'm glad that you picked that. Hugo, I saw that you had your hand raised. Did you want to contribute to one of these?
Yeah, hi, I just also picked that one because I am an energy engineer. So I will actually, by nature, maybe will pick the solar panels and the wind turbines.
Okay.
But in reality, I think that the sustainability goal as itself is just basically, just meet our needs without compromising the future generations. Yeah. Which is basically just trying to be somehow caring for people that don't even exist now. They were not born yet, and just use our resources in a responsible way so they can also have their opportunity to thrive in the future. So that's why also I picked that one.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. I saw that Marianne K, Hands with the Plant, you felt that that was poetic. Tell me what you thought.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I found it very poetic because sustainability is like to maintain a certain level, and the older generations have to also leave some space for the newer generations to also to grow. And then you have those two hands, and then there's a plant that represents the earth and everything that it gives us. So I found it very poetic that you sort of see that the two generations holding a plant together.
Okay, yeah, it's a nice connection between generations, right? You know, the person,
Exactly.
Clearly it's an older person and a younger person, so you can tell that, you know, it's almost like handing over to the next generation, and
Exactly.
it's continuous, right? That's very good. How about Ananya? You had local produce. Tell me why you thought that was. Why does that speak to you?
Hello. So I thought that was interesting because especially with COVID, we realized that the mass marketing which was going on wasn't really sustainable in the long run. And we saw how people started growing their own small patch of vegetables especially when the lockdowns were happening. So I thought that was particularly relevant, especially now, and that was something I did myself, so that stood out to me.
Right, it's really the basic needs. Right, there's no sustainability if you don't eat, right? So it really gets to the core part of what we have to do first before we do anything else. Ayush, you had said Buddha, content life. Tell me, why would you choose that one?
Just for the reason that you need not to live a materialistic life to be happy. There could be a lot of ways to be content, and it doesn't mean that the more resources we exploit means the more happy or more content we could be in life. So it's just about how we want to perceive life. So for me, that is sustainability. If all of us can be content with others apart from the resource intensive lifestyle, then it's all.
So more of a kind of a philosophical view of how we operate. I think I like that Buddha as well, because it reminds us that there's a very spiritual aspect to this as well. You know, if you think about, you know, in my class, we have a whole section on values, and you know, just like looking at the small hands and the large hands, the reason why we care so much about climate change. I mean, for me, I'm 54 years old. I'm not going to see the worst parts of climate change, but I'm very worried about it because of other people, right? For people who are being born today, they're going to have to live with it. So in that case, it's not really an environmental issue. It's really a moral issue, right? Do I have the right to take away the value of someone who hasn't been born yet? No, I don't have the right. So now we're not really talking about politics or engineering or even environment. We're really talking about morals, ethics, and values. So, right. Okay, so we did have a couple of people. Ridwan, renewable energy. Why did you choose that one?
Hello, hi. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
So I'm studying sustainable management in water and energy. And actually, as far as I know, energy is one of the most prominent part of our whole emission, our whole greenhouse gas, and also it contributes to our unsustainable lifestyle. Not lifestyle, like how are we using the resources unsustainably. So at first this picture triggered me to just select it right away. Okay, here is energy, and we have alternative energy sources. So that's why I picked solar panel and wind turbines.
Right. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I saw there were some that were looking at the recycling logo, maybe feel the same way, which is, it's part of that net zero. Let's create a world where we're living within our planetary boundaries, and then on the energy side. All right, that's quite good. I didn't see anyone pick the person in the bottom left. Anybody, any scientists here? Oh, Paola, all right. Just as I was saying that, you typed in, I like the picture with even the chemistry could be sustainable. Tell me, so tell me why.
Yes, I prefer the other picture, the one with dance, but I think even that one is important, just because in the last few days we have some workshop. A student say, I'm studying math and I don't know much about sustainability, or how can I do for sustainability. And I think that even each fields of study maybe should be more engaged on sustainability and can do something. I think that chemistry can move on scientists or math. We can do mathematical models to study and to present, even present the data for explain that something can be changed, or we need to do something. I think that we need to teach to all people that everybody can do something in that sense. I don't know if I explain well, but.
No, that's great. And that's exactly, I think that's a great way to wrap this up, because I think the reason why I wanted to start off with this was because quite often people think of sustainability like it's a discipline, like it's like math or it's like history. I've always felt that sustainability is more like a language. It really cuts across everything, right? So can sustainability be high-tech innovation in a laboratory? Yes. Can it also be, people with their hands in the dirt growing food? Yes. Can it be social networks where people are helping each other? Yes. All of the above. These are all the same. And so it means that there's no one set of study that makes sense as sustainability, but instead it's really more like a language, which is a framework that everyone can use to do the work that they do. Right. So, I always joke with my friends, if I ever fell down and I broke my arm, I don't want you to take me to a sustainability expert, right? I want to go to a doctor, but I would really love for that doctor to open their practice with a sustainability mindset, right? Because they have to have an office, they can have all of the things that make it a sustainable office with a building and a design and low energy, and they could still have a great doctor's office as well. So, what does that mean for education? Well, it means that we have to start rethinking the way that we educate about sustainability. It's not a major, I think that if we had this conversation 10 years ago, I would have said, yes, universities should all have a sustainability major. That's very important. I think now what we recognize is that a sustainability major by itself is great, and some people may want to get into that. But what we really want is sustainability to be level and across everyone's education, so that no matter what you're getting into, if it's hard sciences, technology, medicine, law, you're bringing a sustainability mindset with you. And so I know that for us, that's something that we're really focusing on as we go forward. All right, so let me just tell you about the University of Science and Technology. I have to do this. I'm contractually obligated to give a little 2-minute pitch about my university. As you can see, we are right on the Clearwater Bay campus. So we look right down over this beautiful bay. We are about 30 years old, so we're relatively young but we've been growing quite rapidly. And if you look at the right-hand side of the picture, that's a new campus that we're designing from scratch today. It's not even built yet. And we spent an enormous amount of time really thinking through what does a sustainable campus of the future look like. And quite often we spend so much of our time trying to fix the problems of our existing campus. This was a great opportunity to say, let's start with a blank slate and create a new campus. And what you realize is that there's quite a number of things that we can do today, and a lot of things that we probably can't do because technology is not quite there yet. But sustainability allows us to think about how do we future-proof, right? If I know that we can't put certain types of technologies in today, how can I design the campus so that when those technologies are available, it's easy just to plug them right in, right? So I think that, that really engaging with their design teams and architects and engineers to really think through, like, we're not just building a campus of today, we're building a campus of tomorrow, and what do we need to do? So that's been exciting for us. We have a school of business, a school of engineering, a school of science, school of humanities and social science, and then something called IPO. So, all right, that's enough of my pitch about HKUST. Let me tell you about Hong Kong. As you can see on the left-hand side, Hong Kong is a very vertical city. Everything here is either right on the water or right on the side of a mountain. And on the right-hand side, you can see even when you die, you still have to be vertical. So we stack our grave sites one right over top of the other. It's just the way that we do things. And as you could see from this map, Hong Kong is part of this broader, what we call the Greater Bay Area. Now, many of you have probably heard of Shenzhen. Shenzhen gets a lot of talk these days because it's a real powerhouse in manufacturing. Many of you may have heard of Guangzhou because that's a very old, beautiful city in the south. It was kind of the capital of the south for centuries. But what you might not know is, let's say, a place like Foshan, 7.5 million people. Or maybe you have heard of Dongguan, 8.2 million people. Now, that's not a country. In fact, that's not even a province. That's just a district within the Guangdong province. And so why am I telling you this? What we're seeing here is this is an example of how the world is changing around us. There are places, there are districts in a province in China that are bigger than entire countries, and they're growing rapidly. Let me show you how rapidly they are. This is Shenzhen. As I was telling you, this picture was taken in 2020 on the top. You can see that it's the same picture on the bottom because that mountain right in the middle, that little flat top mountain, you can see it poking out. On the top, the clouds might obscure some of those others, but you can see it was taken from exactly the same place. So Shenzhen 2020, and so the picture on the bottom, when was that picture taken? Does anyone want to guess?
2000.
2000. Yeah. Anyone else?
2010.
You're kidding. Those are really good. So the Chinese people are like, oh, that could have been done in 10 years. No problem. It was actually 1990. But still, that's only 30 years. 30 years. The age of my university is 30 years. And this is what's happened. Shenzhen has basically gone from a very small fishing village to a city of 12 million people. Yeah, 12 million people. That's in 30 years. So here's the first theme of today that we can start talking about, and especially how it relates to education. Change is inevitable. It happens very, very quickly, and it's often unpredictable. Now, in this case, I think that Shenzhen grew in a bit of a predictable way. I don't think anyone had any idea that it could grow so fast and get so big so quickly. But there are lots of things that are happening, and they're happening quickly, and sometimes it is unpredictable. We don't really quite know what's going on. So here's the question for you then is, if we're looking at things that are changing so quickly, what else has changed within 30 years? Well, 30 years ago, there were no cell phones. 30 years ago, there were very, very few people who had email addresses. Forget about the internet. 30 years ago, people used CD-ROMs to listen to music or cassette tapes. 30 years, a lot has changed. In fact, if you took someone from 1990 and they were sleeping for 30 years, they woke up today, they would have a hard time recognizing all the new changes with the digital economy that we have and so forth. So if that's what the last 30 years look like, then what does the next 30 years look like? The next 30 years take us to 2050, and 2050 is the date at which we feel like we really need to have solved greenhouse gas emissions, right? So that's only 30 years from now, and things are happening very quickly. But that means that we really only have actually 29 years to get to a point of net carbon zero. So if things are happening that quickly, then what does that mean for education? What do we think that education is even going to look like? Do we think that we would be in classrooms? Do we think that we'll be doing a lot more Zoom? Maybe you'll be doing Zoom from your own home. Will there be something different than Zoom that allows us to do things in a much different way? What do we think? I can share some of my thoughts, but I'd like to hear what you think first. Oops. I meant to say 1990. Any thoughts? What do you think? What for some of you are in, some of you are in graduate school, so you might have even seen some changes from when you were an undergraduate until today. So, Bev, how about?
Yes, I think that well, firstly, because of these the past 2 years since the pandemic, it has become more virtual. Education as a whole, but I think maybe in the next 30 years it would be that I don't even need to be affiliated to a particular university program.
Yeah,
I could just pick a course from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and another from Politecnico di Milano and one more from the university in Aachen that I'm studying in.
Yeah,
and then just make up my own program of different courses that I wish to study in. So I think in the future, education would be really diverse, but also really customized to what each person wants to study in. And that really opens up the door for your own, how you want to shape your own educational degree and also your life later on, or your paths in the career, maybe.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's so true. So let's say that we get to a point where if we have it really has to provide everything for you, right, from the very beginning to the end. You have to have all the disciplines that are all there, right? So every university has to have a language department, a math department. In what you're describing, what does a university look like, right? So does it need to have all of these different departments, or should we be specializing in one thing that we do really well?
I mean, it's still like speculation, but I think that's where it might head in the future.
Well, I think that's fair. I think that's fair to say. I think there'd be a lot there. It does seem like there'd be a bit more specialization. Schools will be known. I think they'll start to be known for certain things that they do very well. They're just really, really good at this thing, and which also means that you don't necessarily need to do everything. You don't need to have a literature department if your specialty is in technology. Maybe you just focus all of your attention on renewable energy or renewable technologies. And there are other schools that could do very good, And I think that that leads to your second part, which is, then that means that we really are much more dependent on each other, right? If a student is not going to learn literature from my university, then I really need to have some partnerships so that I can try to provide some good value for my student. So if you're not going to, I do think that you should learn literature, but we have these partnerships with others. Yashin, tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think I want to share 2 points. The first one is about, I think more and more we'll have more online education, remote working, and also something like some online seminar and a conference. Actually, for my first year PhD student study, I learned a lot from different kinds of online seminar. I think it just happened in this pandemic area. So if we are not in this pandemic, maybe we have to travel here and there for different kind of conferences. But in my first year PhD study, I think we reduced the transportation, and I think the amount of online seminar, it is much more than previous students. Yeah, this is I think more and more remote and online education and the study. The second point is about, I think more and more we will have multidisciplinary cooperation. I think because of the development, like what we talk about, the climate change and the sustainability, it's a very big topic. So it contains experts from lots of different areas. So I think in the future, it's a trend. Different disciplinary, they work together, and we will have some experts themselves can cross different disciplinary. I think this is the trend for the education.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I do think that the ideas of disciplinary research are over. I think that we, Yashwin, as you know, we have on our campus something called the Sustainable Smart Campus as a living lab, where we encourage people to, in fact, we fund them through my office too. And we have one of our projects that was to clean up this beautiful pond area, and they put in some new machinery and everything like that. And, and the fact is, it failed. It failed badly, and everybody feels bad that it failed. For me, I'm okay with failure, because failure means that you're trying something new.
Yeah.
But the conclusion is it failed because it was too disciplinary. They were treating a pond as if it was like a wastewater treatment plant, and they had all kinds of technical solutions, and they were completely ignoring the fact that nature, you can either fight nature or you can work with nature, and they were fighting it. And so it was a great lesson. I think everybody learned, but it also means that you can't just take a very narrow engineering approach or a very narrow ecological approach. You do need to blend. So that cross-disciplinary nature is very, very important. Thank you. Ayush, how about you?
So I particularly think in the education sector, the size of the blocks of how we impart education will decrease significantly, and then they will be more distributed in our life. And what I mean by that is, like, now we have a 15 years of schooling, then 4 years of bachelor's and 3 years of master's, which are concentrated in, let's say, the first quarter of life, initial 25, 26 years. And then we try to keep it relevant for the next 50 years of life. I think with the pace of the changing technology, that will be irrelevant in the near future. So even today, I can feel that what I'm learning today will definitely be irrelevant 25 years down the line, the pace at which the technology is changing. So I think these blocks of 25 years will become much smaller, and it will be like distributed every 5-6 years, how we have the booster shots of vaccine. So in the education, there will be this upgradation of, let's say, 1 year, 6 months, something's happening in the education. So what I think in 2050, the education will be like much more evenly distributed throughout the life, rather than just being concentrated in the first part.
Yeah. I definitely think that that's going to be a trend. I think it has to be a trend because things are moving too fast. So as a part of this project, we started to get some proposals for blockchain projects. Well, I have no idea what the hell a blockchain is, So I had to go back, and fortunately there's lots of programs. I went to a University of Oxford. They had this, 4-week crash course program on blockchain. I signed up for it. I learned about it. And I think that's probably going to be very typical. You have to. I mean, nobody was teaching about blockchain when I went to school. And there'll be something like blockchain 20 years from now, and that we don't know about. So I think you're right. I think we're really starting to recognize that higher education or education itself is going to really be a lifelong enterprise. And so how can we really create those kinds of conditions? Yeah, very, very good. Very good point. How about you, Victor?
Well, I think in 2050, we will have two critical research approaches. On one hand, those who will be doing field research in other planets in order to make them habitable. And in the other hand, those who doesn't want to give up this planet and will spend their entire life trying to make our civilization completely sustainable. That's my guess.
That's your guess. Okay, good. Yeah, I like it. Well, yeah, well said. Francesca, how about you?
Yeah, hello. I just want to add to what Prof has said in the beginning. I'm sorry. I think it's like interesting, also seen in this collaboration, that it will be more international and like that you can pick like courses from this university or that university and things like that. But I see a difficulty in then how are you going to like define a master degree, or how are you like keep being comparable, like when do you find like now I have like this degree, or now I am like going on to the next level, or if you're like adding up courses from all over the world. And another aspect I wanted to say is that if the courses are like, I mean, more choice not always makes the decision more easy. I think also already today the decision like what you want to study is quite difficult for people like of the age of 18, and if you, then you, it's like, okay, now you can choose like from courses from all over the world, have fun. And I think it's might be like a bit overwhelming in the beginning. And also I feel that the social aspect of education is like a bit forgotten, because if the courses are like monetized, like a bit in like another thing in capitalism, like that you have to gain like another monetary unit, for what are you doing it? I mean, you should not like choose what you think in the end will give the best job or the best opportunities. I mean, this is like one aspect that you would consider, but I mean, I think personally that it's important that you have fun doing what you do, and that you have like interchange ideas with people, and that you like connect with people. And in the end, what does it help you if you have like this course and this course from all over the world, but in the end, you don't have like a network and people you like share interest with. And I don't know, I mean, the social aspect is like in school maybe more important than in university, but I think the personal like person that you talk to really, and not only being in front of a screen and educate yourself just for the education purpose.
I agree. Actually, we're going to talk about that in just a second, but that's, I remember having conversations with some of my colleagues, and at one point, one of them said, I think that the majority of people made the best friend that they have from college is a person that they met within the first 2 or 3 days, right? Like when we were all new and we're all scared and we're all standing in line, and then you're standing next to someone else and you create those bonds, and those are your friends for life, So there's something about that experience. I'm interested, you were talking about kind of like this overwhelming amount of information. I think that may be a role. Maybe universities do start turning into kind of like educational tour guides, right? So you know, Francesca, tell me what you're interested in, and then I'll go help you find all of the interesting things all around the world that, you know, might be appealing. And maybe that's part of education, is not providing the content, but trying to help you find the right stuff wherever it happens to be. So that's a very interesting insight. All right, so let me give you a value proposition. Okay, here's a very simple equation: C plus E plus EX divided by tuition. And so here's what I would suggest this means, is that any kind of a university should be able to look good in this. This gives you $1 per education. So let's start with credential. The credential is what you need, right? That's something valuable. If you get a bachelor's degree, then that means that you probably can do some things that someone without a bachelor's degree cannot do. So we know that there's value there. And we also know that some schools, that credential might be more valuable than others. You know, if you go to some very elite university, then if that's on your CV, maybe that has a bit more ability to open up doors for you. Maybe there's some other alumni that can help you, so forth. So the credential is obviously the first. The reason why most people go to school is for the credential, not because of anything else. The second part is the education, and the education is the piece I think that is fluctuating right now. This is the one that we're all kind of recognizing, that education is changing. And, you know, it used to be that education meant there was one single source of information, and that was a professor, and that person would stand in front of a classroom, and your professor knew everything. They knew which books you need to read, which articles to hand out. Their lectures were, you know, the main source of information that you would get on that certain topic. And then you would have to, you know, provide all that back in terms of an exam or so forth. Well, that's clearly not the case anymore. And I think that many of you may know that if you go into a class and you don't quite understand the concept, I think the first thing that you probably do before you talk to the professor is you probably just go to YouTube, right? Or you go onto the internet. There's so much information there. And I think that the internet has done is it's created this great leveling effect that says that the professor actually is not so important anymore on this educational piece. There may be some other way that the professor is important, but in just providing that information, that doesn't come from the professor anymore. You can find it yourself. So this is a piece that's really fluctuating, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit more. The third piece is the experience, and I think this is, Francesca, that was the last thing that you were just mentioning, is about this experience. There's something very valuable about being able to see people face to face and interact with people who are like you and have similar interests as you do. And maybe you're very interested in renewable energy. You could be in a place where an entire class is filled with people who are also passionate about renewable energy. And you can't really get that out in society because people are diverse. And this experience part, I think, is also changing because we're really starting to recognize that your experience as a part of your learning really locks things in much, much better than anything we've ever tried before in higher education. So there was a famous study from the education school at Stanford University several years ago, where the researchers went back to recent graduates and then they retested them on some of the classes, basically the exact same tests that they had taken just 6 months before, and then maybe 12 months later. And what they found was that, generally speaking, after about 6 to 8 months, most people have forgotten up to 70% of the content that they learned during that class, 70%. And of course, it makes sense. You know that if you're studying for a test, you can't study today and then take the test 2 months from now. You have to study right up to the very last minute because you know that that information will just fly out of your brain. So if that's the case, then what's the real benefit? Why would why do we still have an education system where we force students to study something knowing that that content is just going to fly away over the next couple of months? Well, what we're finding is that if students can learn things by doing, right, getting your hands dirty, work on a group project, those kinds of experiences actually really lock in the education much, much better than just studying, reading books, trying to answer a test. So the experience used to be, isn't it nice? Don't we have a beautiful campus? Would you like to meet your friends? Is there a social network? But now we recognize that the education and the experience really are part of the same thing. That's really what you're getting from higher education, I think. So here's some of the problems, and these are things that we're going to have to resolve. And I'll be interested in some of your thoughts on this as well as we go forward. But if you look at the credentialing, I think a number of you have already pointed out that there's a lot more competition. Why not go to, like I did, I went to Oxford for a blockchain, and I could go to University of Pennsylvania for another certificate on something else. And you could go to my university for a MOOC on, I don't know, some kind of a technology or artificial intelligence, right? So there's a lot more competition now for higher education. A lot of people are saying, what you're doing is not satisfying my needs, and other alternatives are coming out. Another thing that came up, I think maybe Ayush, I think maybe you said this about career alternatives. We know from the research that a student who graduates today is likely to have at least 3 different career changes. And I'm not saying job changes, because we all change jobs, but career changes, like going from an accountant and then deciding, I don't want to be an accountant, I want to be a musician, or, oh, I don't want to be a musician, I'm going to become, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Complete career changes. So what does that mean if our education system is designed to try to provide a specific, very narrow, siloed bit of information, and then you decide to go for a career change, and now you're completely lost, right? How do you go from being an accountant to an entrepreneur, unless our education system can give you a broad set of skills that allow you to go from one set of careers to the next? Also, not just career alternatives, things are happening quickly, right? I don't know if anybody on this Zoom call is a computer programmer or a computer science engineer, but whatever textbook you have today is going to be completely out of date, by 2 years from now, maybe even sooner. So things are happening so quickly that the challenge to the credential certainly does make a difference. Education, as we were talking about, I think that many of you might recognize that there's a real dislike to traditional teaching styles. The idea of that one professor standing in front of a class of 100 students, I think those days are over, or they should be coming to an end. I think that students tell us they don't like those kinds of classes. I think that it's very difficult for professors to teach 100 students all at the same time when they're sitting in a classroom. And there's distractions, and if you can't hear what the professor says, then you can't just hit the rewind button. So that traditional teaching style is really becoming exposed as something that's a bit out of date. And as we were talking about also, I think that students really like to self-learn. I think that we see that quite often, where students will tell me that they are, they would like to have kind of some guidance about what are the broad subjects to learn, and then they kind of like to go out and try to find it on their own. So it does mean that our education approach has to change. And then finally, with experience, when I was at Johns Hopkins, there was this, my president called it the arms race to better accommodations. He felt like every university was spending more and more money to have bigger and better and more beautiful dormitories, and they were getting very expensive, and he thought that it was unsustainable. You can't keep trying to create these resort-like student housing units just to try to be more competitive and steal away the students. But it doesn't mean, though, that we can't still be investing in the experience. I think it means that we need to be thinking about what is a good experience for students to be able to do what they need to do. I think it also means that we need to recognize that our campuses are a bit limited. So when I bring my group of students to Cambodia, I'm giving them a completely different experience that I can't give them on my own campus. We have to leave. And so that, we have to recognize that our campuses can do a lot, but it can't do everything. If you need to get into the rural areas or into an urban area, you have to leave the campus. And that's also part of the experience. It's quite important. So here's what a lot of their classrooms look like. We still have lecture halls that look like this, but I would say that this is going to rapidly become a thing of the past. My own personal opinion. I think this is unsustainable. It doesn't recognize what higher education is headed towards. So getting back, the two pieces that, there's not much we can do about the credential. That is what it is. And if you are in a very prestigious university, then that's great. If you're not in a prestigious university, I'm sure you're working hard. But the two things that we have the most control over are the experiences and the education. And so I'm a sustainability guy. So I tend to think about the experiences from a sustainability point of view. How do you create an experience that really gets to all of those things that we were talking about earlier? Remember about feelings, about values, morality, ethics, a sense of wonder, a sense of community. All of those kinds of things need to be validated by the experience, and so and the experience is contained within your surroundings. So I do think that we start to look a lot more at universities as a place that really reconnect with nature, because that really does get you back to. A number of you had talked about the plants and the growing. Right? So our universities should be places where you see that. You should see gardens and orchards and the kinds of things that really bring you back to the value of the earth. The earth can provide some terrific services. And so the greening of the outside, greening of the inside of the building should be quite a part of it. I also think that buildings can be multidimensional. Again, we need to, universities can be quite stressful. We need to find ways that we can enjoy our life. And so here's something I've always wanted to do. I've never been able to talk our senior leadership into it yet, but I feel like we should have these slides everywhere, so you could go from one class to the next and just slide right into the coffee shop and, just think about how that would relieve your stress and make you feel happy and ready for your next class. So I think and I'll kind of wrap this up here, and I'd like to hear some thoughts from you. But what I would say is that as our higher education is evolving, I think we're starting to recognize a lot more about how the experiences and the campuses can be working really together as a part of the educational component, right? You can learn things on the campus. We have something called the Campus as a Living Lab, where we get students and faculty members to actually do projects. We can see them, you trip on them, you have to walk around them in the hallway because there's things that are happening. But that shows a real vibrancy of using the campus to test new ideas and challenge each other to become more innovative. But I think from my point of view, it also is really very exciting because it means that we have to really focus a lot more on the surroundings, right? So if there's a campus that is kind of a beautiful resort-like setting, well, that's wonderful, but that's not really helping with the educational point of view. So think about the settings as a way to understand sustainability and as a way to influence your behavior, a way to influence your social lives, and how do you create experiences. And you can't do that with a manicured resort-like campus. You have to do it in a way that it feels a little bit rough, a little bit more natural, a way that you can get people and try things and plant new things, and you're okay if some die because you're trying a new type of organic fertilizer. But we're all learning. It's always a work in progress. So campuses are essential to the learning experience because they are the laboratory where we can be learning and testing. All right. Okay, let me just stop there for a second and tell me your thoughts. Is there anything that I said that you agree with? Anything you disagree with? Anything you think I'm completely out of my mind? Francesca?
Yes, I really agree with you on the topic of traditional learning or teaching. That has to change, because I don't know, it has to like become more diverse and like offer the students more like different approaches to education, to learning, because not everyone is different, and there are nowadays also like scientific studies that not everyone learns like best with one method. And yeah. I personally I study mathematics, and it's really like old school teaching, and the professor's like in the classroom and writes on the blackboard. So yeah. I personally always got like the feeling this is the method, and if you don't go well with it, and if you can't like learn well with this method, you have failed, or like you are not good enough, or you like do something wrong, and that's like not the point. I mean, it can be that only this method does not apply good to you, and that like you need other methods to learn, and that's like you can do it like apart from the classes, but it's like not offered by the university itself. You have to like get self-responsible, and I think it's important that the university does this with the students, like from herself, like trust in the students, like to have a bit more self-responsibility and also like engagement with finding their method of learning.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a nice way to put it, because it really does, you know, to me, it feels like it's all about the experience, you know, and I think that I always find that I learn so much. Whenever I teach a class, I feel like I've learned as much, you know, so I'm kind of an expert in some things, and I'm happy to explain those, but I'm not an expert in other things, and that's where we kind of go through some of these things together, you know, and so I think that's right. I also think that kind of what you're saying really also helps to really, you know, beg the question about, you know, how do we turn this into a continuous learning? And I don't remember who said it earlier, but somebody was talking about how, you know, we need to be doing this over time, and maybe, you know, instead of having a 4-year degree, maybe it's like a 1-year degree, but there's a 1 year every 5 years. You're always kind of refreshing. I think that makes perfect sense. You know, things change. You want to come back. So, Timbete, I see your hand up.
Okay, thank you. While we are on the topic of having this traditional education system, I wanted to understand that maybe it depends on the context, especially me coming from the developing countries. Maybe changing the traditional system might be challenging because of the technologies or economy. Even developed countries, maybe that might also be a little bit about technology and economy too. For example, when I say economy, it's about the space. If campus is like, if the campus size is still a small space, we might not have the luxury to change the spaces or transform it into. It might be, I'm saying there's always a solution, but it might be challenging to come up with, to ignore the traditional system maybe, because the more relaxed it is, or the more we include the greens, it might also change how we rearrange spaces. Of course, yeah. Still it's manageable. I'm just saying the challenge, and maybe that's the points that I would like to also understand, having this economical aspect on education, space, especially related to campuses shrinking nowadays. And the third one is about the number of students are increasing. So how can we also connect that with having this sustainable system in the education or tradition?
Okay. Great. Yeah. So great questions. So here's what I would say. You know, one of the reasons we get into trouble sometimes is that we tend to look at historical patterns as the way to continue. I remember years and years ago, gosh, this was in the 1990s, I guess, when Somalia was coming out of a civil war, and there were a lot of companies that were trying to say, well, we need to get some telecommunications, and say, oh my gosh, it's going to cost so much money. Do you know how much it costs to put all of those telephone wires? And then somebody said, why do we have to put in the telephone wires? We can go directly to wireless. Just forget about the whole wire, And so sometimes, when people think traditionally, they do the things that has always been done, and then they miss the opportunity to leapfrog to the next. So I bring that up because there's a new university called Minerva, and some of you may have heard of this or maybe not, but they did the same thing. They started just about 5 years ago, and they started with a very interesting question, which is knowing everything that we know now about education and learning and teaching and what's important in the 21st century economy and the kinds of skills that need to be included. How would we start a new university? Starting from scratch, complete whiteboard. And what they realized was they didn't need a campus at all. They said, we can do a lot of this online, and then we can actually borrow space at other people's universities, and we can actually travel. So the entire cohort will move. We hosted them here one year, and there was 50 or 60 students. They all came here. They took advantage of all of our resources, all of our campus. They were swimming in the swimming pool, everything. And then after that year, they moved back to Paris, I think. And then the next year they went to San Francisco. And they created a model that completely rejected the campus altogether, just because they thought of a different way that they could do that. And they realized that renting out space in an existing university cost about 25% of the amount of money compared to like building your own campus and building the new buildings and all that. So I do think that it can be very daunting, but I have seen a couple of very interesting approaches where people just reject, the traditional path, and they say, we're going to do things completely differently. And they've found ways to do it very inexpensively and actually quite successfully. So good points though. Yeah. Marlon, how about you?
Yes, hello. Thank you for the lecture so far. So I'm very glad that you highlight the spatial qualities and their relation to educational value, because I really much agree that they're probably inseparable and intertwined. And I'm kind of observing the educational buildings lately, because I feel like a lot of new buildings in campus and also here in the city I'm right now, the school buildings are reminding me a lot of factories or office space buildings even. And I think this is a crucial point to change the spatial values, because and why this is, I think it's still because we are bound to the modes of production that we currently have. Like I also worked in the architectural practice, which are focusing on school buildings, and they are very limited in their modes of production because they are the state and the laws force them to use this digital software, which doesn't allow new material use or different ways to approach new educational buildings.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can really feel the difference of practice and the courses I have here in uni, because here we have some ways to experiment with clay material, for example, as as a way to make a lecture halls, for example, and yeah, that's what I feel. I feel like there really has to be a change in the mode of production and praxis, especially. And
I think so. Yeah, good comments. Good comments. I think I agree. I do think that the campus of the future probably looks more like a big sandbox where people just try different things, you know, and maybe we've had some conversations here about all of our classroom spaces and all of our lecture halls. You know, over time, maybe we just convert them all into maker spaces and experimental, you know, testing, you know, and then if we have classes, just do the classes online, but really utilize all of our campus just to be able to test out new ideas or network or socialize or, you know, whatever. All right, let's take a quick break. Before we go, I'm going to show you one more, and I'll leave this on the screen. And let's take, I guess, about a 10-minute break. And then what I want you to do when we come back, I want you to tell me what all of these have in common. They're all sustainability. They're all kind of definitions of sustainability. But there's one very, very specific thing that they have in common. In fact, I'll give you a hint. It's something that they're all missing. So, all right. Saren, should we say we'll come back at 5:15 or no? What time is it for you? 11:15?
Yes, 11:15.
Okay, 5:15 for me, 11:15 for you. All right. Okay, so let's take a little break, stretch your legs, get something to eat, get a coffee, and we'll see you in about 12 minutes. Okay. Does anybody spot it? We can, let's start with the Harvard Business School online. They have a definition. In business, sustainability refers to doing business without negatively impacting the environment, community, or society as a whole. Okay, that's nice. I like that. But it's missing something. It's missing something really, really, really important. Karen, if you get this right, then you get the gold star for the day.
My guess is that it misses the change and positive impact for the future.
Yes, exactly. It misses the future, right? The whole point of sustainability is to sustain something over time, over the long run, right? The reason why we work on climate change today is because there'll be problems in the future. We have to focus on the future. All of these are great. I don't disagree with any of these. Environment, social, economic, and ecology, culture, politics, all of these things are very important. But really, the thing that anchors all of this together is that you make decisions today that will make us better off in the future, right? Or at least, at a minimum, make decisions today that won't harm us in the future. You know, if we could even start with that, that would be a good step forward. So over the next couple of minutes, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about why thinking in the future, you know, is so hard for us. It's not unexpected that all of these very, very smart people who are all very well versed in sustainability, they all still miss the biggest, most important thing of all, in my opinion, which is that focus on the future. But Marlon, did you want to say something before I move?
No, I was just wanted to say that all these graphs are maybe missing the aspect of psychology or mindset, like what we have with the Buddha earlier. But maybe that.
Oh yeah. Okay. All right. I buy that too. That's true. It's, you know, well, I'm glad that you say that, because really I teach a class called Sustainability Thinking, and my premise is there's just something about the way that our brains are wired. And this gets to your psychology question. There's just something about the way that our brains are wired that sometimes we miss some of these things And there's a lot of good work that goes into why that's the case. But I think the first thing we have to recognize is that we do have a lot of blind spots, right? It's not knowing what we know about the way that our brains work. It's not unexpected that we're heading in an unsustainable way, just because that's the way we're wired. So let me go. Theme number 2, why are we so bad at thinking about the future? Yeah, somebody forwarded me this picture. You know, only in the United States can you go to Las Vegas, meet somebody at a bar, go to a drive-in wedding and get married all in the same evening, right? Talk about not thinking in the future. So, you know, I think that getting married in Las Vegas is a big business. The second biggest business is probably the divorce lawyer. So, you know, we make bad decisions. We don't think of the future. You know, tattoos, you know, wow, tattoo sounds like a great idea. Again, tattoo removal is one of the biggest booming businesses in the world now, because a couple of years later, you think, what was I thinking? In some cases. So we're not very good at it. We don't think in the future. We don't think long term. We don't, you know, I mean, you smoke when you're, you know, I was a smoker for years and years. I wasn't thinking about what my life is going to be when I'm 60. You know, our brains just don't work that way. So it's not unexpected that we don't change when we know we have to. We've known for 40 years that climate change is real. And over the years, all of the evidence just keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger. But it seems like it's so far out into the future that it's hard to kind of get, you know, motivated to do something about it. We are really designed to react in the moment. And if you think about where we all came from as human beings, then it makes a lot more sense. You know, it's really only been the last 100 years or so that we started spending more time inside than outside. You know, we've never done that for our entire existence. We've always been outside people. And, you know, it's really actually quite unhuman, unnatural for us to now be spending so much of our time inside of a building. Even 100 years ago, when people were inside, for whatever reason, they tried to get back outside. So, you know, our bodies were designed to be able to deal with certain things in a way that makes it very much more difficult. It makes it hard for us to adapt to change, right? If something happens today, then we can deal with it. If we think it's going to happen next week, it's much more likely that we're going to wait until next week before we deal with it. It's hard to make long-term decisions. Right. This is one of the, you know, when I put on my hat of being the sustainability officer for this university, that's the biggest fight that I always have. You know, when we build a new building, people will say, oh, you know, you could have this new chiller, but it's going to be more expensive. You know, and to me, that's the craziest thing, because I don't think of what's expensive when you buy it. I think of what's expensive when you use it over the next 20 years. But it's hard to think that way. And the third thing is that it's very difficult to envision the future. And let me show you a couple of, well, so start with this idea that in sustainability, we need to really imagine what the future is. You know, in order to achieve a sustainable future, we have to imagine it. And here's a problem. We don't do that very well. So as I was saying before, you know, all of us essentially up until just, you know, 100 or 200 years ago, we were all outside people. We were farmers, or we were woodsmen. We were travelers. It really wasn't until just very, very recently that we were spending more and more of our time inside. So I bring this up because this is what we call, so for people who work with their hands, let's say 100 years ago or 200 years ago, they were what we would call perceptive thinkers. So a farmer in the 18th century would be a great perceptive thinker, meaning that the majority of what they know is from what they perceived on a daily basis. And so this person right here, they probably know when to plant, just by looking at the soil. They know what kinds of crops are going to come up. They might even be able to tell how the weather is changing by watching the birds fly, because these are all things that this person has perceived. They've seen it. They've learned through that. So a perceptive thinker can be very, very good at dealing in the present, but a perceptive thinker is not very good at thinking in the future. And why would they have to? A farmer in the 18th century, or 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, never had to think about 5 years from now. They had to think about, what am I going to do today, or maybe what am I going to do in the next season, right? So the longest planning that a person really ever needed to have was probably season by season. Do I eat all my seed corn, or do I save some of it so I can plant it next year? But really, there was just no need to be able to plan farther than that, because there was nothing, really that would require, or there was no penalties for not planning that far in advance. The other thing that we recognize is that we also evolved in ways to react to things quickly, right? So 5,000 years ago, if you were in the woods and you heard a sound, you were probably immediately aware, because there's probably there's an animal that's about to eat you, right? So we learned to solve problems quickly and fast. So all of those things really prepared us quite well to be able to survive. But those kinds of things are not very good for us to be in today, in the 21st century, because solving a problem quickly usually means that we're solving a problem in a way that doesn't have a very good sustainable outcome. And so you could see this right now. You don't have to go very far. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, and we're smart enough to know that there's a global pandemic and that it comes from a virus, and we can see the virus. We have scientists who can kind of look at the DNA and create a vaccine. I mean, we're doing some incredibly smart, innovative things, but at the same time, we are using disposable masks, right? So we've learned how to solve a problem without thinking about what the next problem is, And so in a year or so, hopefully this whole pandemic, maybe we'll be, over this pandemic by then. But what's the next big problem we're going to have to deal with? We're going to have to deal with thousands, maybe millions and millions of disposable masks that are floating in the oceans. Because right as of now, the estimate is that there's between maybe 20 and 30 million disposable plastic masks in the oceans today, just over the last year and a half, right? So we're very good at trying to fix things in the moment, but we're not very good at being able to see how fixing something today might create another problem tomorrow. Or it's difficult to think about seeing how. There's a researcher named Peter Singh, and he's a systems thinking professor at Cornell University. And he has a line that I've always liked, which is that today's problems were yesterday's solutions, right? And that's a great indication that we tend to solve one problem at a time, and we don't think about the outcomes. Well, we don't think about future as well. And future is the key part of sustainability. We have to think about how we preserve this planet for the next generation, but we're actually quite bad at it. So here's what the research tells us. The research says that the reason we're not very good at it is because we don't know what the future looks like. And if you don't know what the future looks like, then that creates a sense of uncertainty, and your brain does not like uncertainty. So here's a quote: "The brain values certainty and treats uncertainty and the inability to predict the future as a source of deep discomfort." Well, what does your brain do when it's in a state of deep discomfort? It pushes it away, right? That's what our brains do. That just kind of is natural. You just push it out. So what that means is that if we are thinking about something in the future, and if it does give us discomfort, there's a lot of uncertainty. To follow this, it's not just that we fail to plan for future events. Uncertainty is so aversive that our brains create false certainty about the future, making the assumption that things will always be the way that they are now, which is a bias fittingly known as the end of history illusion. Now, this is really interesting, and the researchers who were working on this did a study where they had hundreds of people participating, ranging from 18 years old at the youngest, all the way to about 75 or 76 years old at the oldest. And they essentially were asking them questions about, have you seen things change over the past 5 years? Yes, of course. Have you seen things change over the past 10 or 15 years? Some of the older people, they'd say, you know, what are some changes that have happened in your lifetime? Everybody recognizes that the world is changing quickly. People would bring up examples of, well, you know, my first cell phone was, you know, with this big boxy thing, and now it's, you know, it's 10 times more powerful. Or, you know, the older people would say, yeah, I had a black and white TV. Now I've got this massive, you know, monitor. It's beautiful. Everybody recognizes that the world is changing, and it's changing in a very fast pace. And then they would ask a question, and they'd also ask about, like, how about you? Have you changed in your lifetime? And people would say, yeah, I mean, you know, when I was young, I was a real hellraiser, you know, but I've calmed down now. I've matured. I'm much more calm these days. Or, you know, when I was young, I didn't like this, but now I like that. Or maybe there was a food that I didn't like, but now I do. And then the next part was, then they ask about, well, what do you think over the next 5 years? And all across the board, from the youngest to the oldest, they all felt like, you know, I think things have settled down, and I think they're probably pretty predictable. So it's a really interesting kind of a bias, and nobody really recognized that they had been asked all these questions about this massive, rapid change, but they all seemed to feel very comfortable with the idea that the next 5 to 10 years are probably, things are going to level off. It's probably going to be about the same. Well, we know that that's not going to be the case, right? The next 5 years are going to be crazy. The next 10 years, there's going to be lots and lots of disruptive change. And that's okay. As sustainability people, we need to learn how to embrace that. There's a certain amount of uncertainty in our future. We need to recognize it. But if we start to embrace it, that makes us a lot more prepared to make the kinds of decisions. Here's another on that kind of that same. This is from Thomas Friedman, who's a kind of a contemporary thinker, writer, commentator, and he refers to something that he calls the Great Acceleration. And his hypothesis is that human beings can only adapt at a very slow pace. You know, we do adapt, we do learn new things, but it takes us a little bit longer. But technology goes at a completely different pace, and especially today, it's almost, you know, it's logarithmic. It's just changing so rapidly. And his point is that we've gotten to this area where the rate of change is accelerating so fast that it's beyond our ability to absorb it, right? To change. Remember that as a society, we kind of gradually, as a group, decide how we want to deal with these new technologies. As a group, for those of you who remember when cell phones were first becoming very popular, let's say in the early 2000s or even late 1990s, you may remember that there was no social norm about cell phones. And so it was not unusual to go to the movie theater and somebody pull out their phone. Hey, I'm at the movies, it's great, you know, because the technology had gone so fast that we didn't create, society hadn't created a social norm to say, no, that's not right. You shouldn't be talking on a phone in the middle of the movie theater. That's really rude. So that's an example of how things can sometimes go faster than our society's ability to change, right? So I love this picture. I keep thinking, you know, this is another example of how, you know, we know that we love our phones, but don't we also love our social, you know, fabric? These are 8 or 10 people who have all carved out time to go meet at the restaurant so they can share their day and enjoy themselves, but they're all looking at their phone, right? This is kind of, you know, one of those things where eventually I think we'll start to move away from it. People will realize, wow, I went all the way to meet my friends and we just looked at our phones the whole time. What a waste of time. And then society will start to, recognize that there is some etiquette. But there are, and there are some precedents to this. If you look at in the early 1900s, when electricity was first invented, we didn't realize that it made sense to have only one company supply the electricity. So there were many companies, and every single company had to put their electric line into your building. And some of the cities in 1910s, 1920s looked like this. There were so many wires that you couldn't possibly even see the buildings in the background. So we had to adapt. We had to realize that technology has gotten faster, has gone faster than our ability to adjust. You may have heard of the term Luddites. There was someone, I think a fictional character, I don't know if it was a real person, but someone named Ned Ludd, who was agitating a lot of people, saying, the machines that we are developing in the Industrial Revolution, they're all going to destroy our jobs. We're all going to be on the side of the road. No one will have a job. We'll all starve to death. And people were in such a panic that sometimes mobs would actually go into factories and destroy the machines and set the factories on fire. They were terrified that this change was happening so fast, and they didn't know where it was going, and they didn't know how it was going to impact them in the end. And of course, another example of how at that time they had allowed this technological change to happen so fast that people were not able to adjust. And in this case, they actually adjusted by attacking, by setting these places on fire and smashing the machines. So there's some precedent for us to look at how important it is to make sure that we've got the technology that is advancing in the right way. I would say that, for example, artificial intelligence is one of those technologies that has so much potential for good, for positive change. It also has some potential to really screw some things up. And we need to make sure that we understand that as we go forward. We know that things like cloning, looking at the DNA, we actually have the potential, we have the capacity to clone a human being, right? But the technology has moved so fast, we haven't actually had the conversations about, is it right to clone a human being? Is it moral, to clone a human being? Those kinds of things, we need to make sure that we are always trying to ask ourselves ahead of time before we start to react to things, because that's when we get into trouble from a sustainability point of view. So I've got something very quickly I wanted to ask you, and we can either break out into a group, Sarah, if you think that makes sense, or we could just do that as a group conversation here. But just as a visioning exercise, I'd like you to think about these two questions. Number one, what will you tell your grandchild about life in 2021? Now, so I don't know how old everybody is. Maybe some of you already have grandchildren. I'm assuming that you're probably, still many decades away from having a grandchild. But let's say in, 2040 or 2045, you have a grandchild, 25 years from now. You're going to tell them things that are going to surprise them, right? I have a 14-year-old son, and I have a 17-year-old son. And my 14-year-old, when he was younger, he would always ask me questions like, "Hey, Dad, what was your, what was your favorite app on the phone when you were growing up?" I didn't have an app. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have any of those things. My son sometimes will say, "Gosh, Dad, what was it like growing up when everything was in black and white?" I'm not quite that old, but it's surprising to them. They don't know what a life was like before there were games to play on your phone, or big screen TVs, or the internet where you could just watch endless hours of YouTube videos. So what do you think is going to be the most surprising thing that your grandchild will say to you? "Oh, grandmom or granddad, how did you ever live without this thing?" And what do you think that thing is? So Sarah, I was thinking this might actually be kind of nice to get into some breakout groups and maybe just have some small discussions. It might be easier just for, let's say, groups of
Sure.
5.
So how we are 40 people, 36 participants. How many breakout sessions shall we create?
Let's say, well, let's see, if it was 10, that would be 4. So let's say 8 breakout groups.
Okay. I'll ask help from Sahar and Jenner, please, for 8 breakout groups.
All right, and I'm going to send this to you, and you could take a look at both of these. The second one is looking at these skills to the right. These were skills that were LinkedIn had identified as the most needed skills in 2020. So soft skills, creativity, persuasion, collaboration, adaptivity, and emotional intelligence, and then some hard skills. And again, I want you to do the same thing, which is look at those and think, which one of those skills will still be important in 2030? So 10 years from now, will we still be talking about blockchain? Maybe we moved on to something else. But maybe analytic reasoning will still be very important. So here's what I'd like to do. If we could just get into groups and maybe we could pop in, but pick in your group, just pick one of these and then try to answer these questions, and maybe you can, bounce some ideas around. The goal is to be able to answer why. So if you think that there's something that would be very surprising to your grandchild in 2045, why would it be surprising, right? And the second part, what's the hardest to explain? In other words, what are we doing today that they're going to be like, oh my God, did you really do that? 2021, you were still something, right? You were still wearing masks. You were still, well, for example, the hardest thing that I have to explain to my kids was that when I was in college, people could smoke in all of the buildings. That's shocking. My kids are like, what? How is that possible? You could actually smoke. I said, yeah, you could smoke in the library if you wanted to. What? Smoke in the library? So there'll be certain things that they'll just be shocked at, I would think. And so let's try to anticipate, what are they?
And how many minutes shall we allocate for the discussion?
Let's just do about maybe 5 to 7 minutes. I think that should be enough to kind of get the juices going.
Okay. Okay.
Do that. So let me also, sorry, I'm going to. Okay, bear with me just 1 second. I'm going to save this onto my desktop. I thought I could do it that way. And then I'll send it to everyone. Okay. Okay, did everyone see the PowerPoint in the chat? Okay, it's just the same thing here, but once you get into the breakout room, you might not be able to see this screen. So if you want to just open that up first, and then once you go into the room, then you'll have it. Okay. All right, we'll see you in there.
Davis, excuse me.
Oh, you're muted.
I would like to introduce you very briefly to our director, Professor Reicher. She just joined our session. Krista, hello.
Hi, Krista. Nice to see you, Professor.
You are muted, Krista. then you would like to go to the different sessions, I guess, right, Davis?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe with your team, we could just kind of pop in just to kind of see what they're.
Sure. Okay, she's unmuted now. Okay.
All right.
Hello.
So you know what?
Krista, Davis is our guest for the summer school from Hong Kong.
Hi, Krista.
Sorry, I have a problem with my computer. Thank you for your presentation. It was great.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's fun.
She's also in the meeting, I guess, meanwhile. But I would like to develop our conversation with you, Davis, in the coming months, week, on your work on how to transform university campuses into sustainable areas. But this is something we can talk later on. I don't want to take your time from the workshop session. Okay, so see you in some of the breakout rooms.
All right.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I think I'll just pop in.
Okay, it's good.
Okay. Some very interesting conversations. I wish I could have listened to a little bit longer. Tinbete, is that, do I pronounce that right? Tinbete. You were talking about like maybe we have a whole different concept of time.
Yeah.
I like that. I've heard that people spend a lot of time doing research in like caves and tunnels, like their whole biological clock just gets turned, like, you know, they don't have a 24-hour day any longer. It's either way longer, way shorter. So anyway. Okay. All right. I think we're all back. Welcome back, everybody. Wow. I was just trying to pop into some of the rooms and listen to what you were saying. I have to say they were just some really fun, very exciting things. One of you was talking about time. I think I just mentioned that. One of you was talking about eating animals. I think that maybe that is a shock. I mean, with some of these plant-based foods like Impossible Burgers and things that are happening now, maybe at some point there'll just be no need to kill an animal. You could still have all that meat if you want, but you don't have to get an animal. And yeah, that would be shocking. People would be like, "Whoa, my God, did you really kill you really kill that animal just to get that meat?" One of you mentioned making an appointment. I remember that vividly when I was a kid. You'd never call up somebody. You just show up at their house, knock on the door. "Hey, is Billy home?" You know, "No, all right. Do you mind if I just wait here?" You know, then you go in and you just, you know, and their mother will make you some tea or something, and then you just, you know, but that, yeah, you never had to plan for a play date. One of the things I think could be very shocking, you know, at some point, I do think that this whole concept of waste is going to be a shock, right? People are going to say, "Wait a minute, you only used things once and then you threw it away. And what'd you do? You put it into this landfill?" That's probably going to be pretty shocking at some point. They're going to think, "Well, why, you know, it has great value. Why didn't you just, you know, melt it down and use it again like we always do?" So I do, yeah, I think that's, so does anybody have any, from any one of the groups, any really interesting things that came up, anything you want to share with our big group?
I think one point from our team is about, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe more and more remote working, online working.
Yeah.
So parents can take care of their children by themselves. No need to ask their parents to take care of their children. And also for some company, they will have some facilities for their colleagues can bring their children to the office, and they can work in the company, and at the same time they can take care of their children. So in that case, people, the pressure of people to take care of their children will be released.
Yeah.
At least it's much better than at the current stage.
I think that's a whole fascinating area of exploration, is looking at work, the future of work, you know, because I do think the way that we work now is not very efficient. We spend a lot of our time commuting. I think that the hours of work, I noticed there was a company in the US, a software company, and they've cut down their work week to like 25 hours. And the CEO did a whole kind of cost benefit analysis. And she was saying, you know, there's so much of the day that you spend kind of just doing your email and stuff like that. If you can categorize it so you work very efficiently when you're the most awake, and when it's, you know, you could probably get a full day's worth of work done productively in maybe, you know, 4 or 5 hours, you know. So why don't we just redo our work week that way? Makes a lot more sense. Then you spend more time with your kids. Yeah, I think that's going to be quite interesting. Francesca, what was your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know if Hugo wanted to say something before.
Oh, I'm sorry, Hugo, I missed you. Yeah, Hugo had an interesting comment about PowerPoint. Maybe you want to share that.
Oh yeah. Perhaps that the penetration of in artificial intelligence and this kind of stuff, optimization, I don't know, will just make it crazy for people in the future, that we just took the time, you know, to do a PowerPoint slide or using the mouse or do just manually will be just simply crazy. And perhaps in the future, really, when you will show maybe your thesis presentation in PowerPoint, they will think, dude, you did that. I mean, with your own mouse and your hands, you're crazy. So perhaps it will be shocking for them.
I know. Well, maybe you just start to talk about your dissertation, and then the artificial intelligence will populate the PowerPoint for you. It just kind of like automatically, maybe that's the way it works. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Francesca, how about you?
Yeah, in our group, I have 2 points maybe to add. That one point is that Martina said, about ideologies and like concerning, for example, gender diversity, that maybe it would be hard to explain why it was not like accepted nowadays, and that there's still racism, sexism, ableism, other isms, I don't know, happening nowadays. And the second point about energy transition towards renewable energy, why it took us so long, like in 2021, you're really still relying on coal to make energy and stuff, like, yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah, those are good ones. Well, I really hope you're right about the ideologies, about the ologies. I worry that those things are so deeply ingrained that we just have to live with them like a virus. But yeah, I like your enthusiasm. I hope that that's the case. I hope that at some point we realize, or we figure out how just to survive and get along in this world and share our resources in ways that we don't rely on these really ugly crutches like all the isms. So, Marlon, how about you?
Yeah, in our group we also had, well, several points. One which is pretty similar to the last one, like to reduce or to explain misinformation in the future or recent political decisions. Like we even see it right now with Afghanistan decisions or something like this. Like even now it's hard to explain just very recent ones, and I think that will be a overall thing. And maybe it is to somehow objectify political decisions more. And another point maybe, which also is interesting, that we really think of the stability of huge company players like Google or Amazon, like we think they're really stable, but actually their history is kind of short overall. Like they're just recently in the overall time span got built up, and yeah, and we think it's hard to imagine an alternative to this big corporations, even though they might not be that stable as they seem right now.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good points. Yu, how about you? What's your thoughts?
So actually, I'm expecting like in the future there will be like a really powerful translator, so that language barrier will no longer be a problem, and like the international sources, like the resource, will be like accessible to every people, like no longer as a privilege to the educated people like us. And I think that can also like boost the learning curve of the entire technology. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I would love that. That would be so great. Whenever, I've been here 8 years, my Chinese is still pretty bad, and whenever I speak, people are like, we'll speak English. It's okay. Don't worry about it. So yeah, that would be great. I'd love that. All right. Angie?
Yeah, I would like to add some points about mobility. We have some new technologies that are already developed, but they are not implemented yet. For example, we have the first testing routes about autonomous mobility. And I think people wouldn't imagine that we are right now driving the cars ourselves, because this takes a lot of time and we can't be productive when we are driving. I mean, imagine that we are in a car in the future. We might not sit looking to the front, but maybe looking towards the inside or towards the outside to the window and using the window as a screen, and we can already be productive while driving around, or also that we go towards shared mobility. It saves a lot of cars. Everyone now owns an individual car, and if we share cars, we can save a lot of space for parked cars that you can use in a different way, for example, for greenery. And this makes our cities more sustainable. And also delivery is another aspect.
I wonder if we even own the cars at some point. It's almost like a share. You just, because if it's an autonomous vehicle anyway, it doesn't really matter if you own it or don't own it. Maybe it's a subscription service. It just picks you up like a taxi. And then, yeah, I bet that's one of those things that, our grandkids will be shocked. They'll probably say, like, really? You could, go to a bar and drink alcohol and then drive a car? That's crazy. Who would do such a thing? you know. Yeah, that's good. Ridwan, how about you?
Hi. Most of the points that we discussed were kind of covered by other groups, but the one point that we discussed about is like working in an office. I mean, our grandkids would be kind of shocked to know that we used to go to offices and to work there in the daytime.
Yeah.
And also we discussed about like the current traveling time, because in the future, we think that the traveling time will be much shorter to travel distances. So it would be surprising to them that we needed like 3 or 4 hours to travel 200 kilometers. So that's 2 points I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's very good. That's a very good point. All right, so this is, I think a lot of you have been looking into traveling and transportation. You know, this is really, this pandemic has been so difficult. I mean, one of the things that I just loved about being in Hong Kong is that I was a very short plane ride away from Singapore, Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh City, Tokyo, Beijing. I mean, all within just a few hours. There was this whole world of travel and exploration and different and beautiful countries and cultures, and that's all come crashing down. Now we're stuck in Hong Kong and not able to leave. But I do think that we've all had a taste of travel. We all, you know, would like to be able to do that, and not just for commuting, but you know, just because that there is something that's very special about, you know, going in. I do think I would agree that there's going to be a lot of innovation in technology, especially as as electrification starts to take over a lot of these transport modes, right? So, for example, here are a couple of things I think that that might be surprising in the future. I've been seeing so much more about air taxis, and we know that drones are cheap and they're easy to go. And what I'm finding is that, actually not in the far future, but even just in a couple of years, it's going to be much more common to get into an air taxi like this that will pick you up at the airport, just take you right where you go. It's all electric, so it doesn't have the fossil fuels. It has so many different advantages. It can, land like a drone. It could actually land right on your building rooftop. So some of these things are not that far away. Some of these things are actually quite close. A number of you were talking about work. I think the future of work is going to be quite important. I think that the picture on the top left is probably what an office looks like. There's not cubicles, there's not office space. It's probably more collaborative. It may be something where you kind of come and you go. You bring your laptop with you. You don't have to have a desktop. I have a feeling that's probably much more like what it's going to look like. And then on the right side, I do think that, as we become more urban, we're going to expect to have a lot more of our resources right in our buildings. So our buildings are not going to be purely for residential or purely for work. They're probably going to be combinations, and they're probably going to have a lot of greenery. In fact, I imagine that a lot of the food that we eat is probably going to come from the buildings that either we live in or probably the building right next door, because that's the easiest, cheapest way to get that food right to your doorstep. And of course, if we're using some of these, synthetic burgers and things like that, you don't need a big farm. You can preserve the natural world for what it's good for, and then we can make our food sources. So a lot of interesting things to look at. I do think, it's an exciting time. If we think about the future in terms of what could be exciting or what could shock us, then that helps prepare us. So remember when I was saying that the biggest problem that we have is that we are adverse to uncertainty. But if we start to really embrace what the future can look like, then that relieves our uncertainty. It relieves the stress, right? If we start to think about what does the future of work look like? What does the future of mobility look like? All of a sudden, I don't feel quite so concerned about it anymore, because now I can start to envision it and think about it. And so that's one of the roles I think that we can play as sustainability people. And also, through our university, through education, we can be talking about, don't be afraid of the future. There's a lot of interesting things out there, but let's embrace it. Let's embrace the idea that some of it's a bit uncertain, but but there's a lot that we know and we're heading in a direction, and let's try to anticipate. All right, I just have one more thing that I wanted to share with you before we leave. Just as something that just I think is very important for me and for my work, and I wanted to share it with you because that was part of the deal. This is called inverse thinking. I don't know, maybe you've seen this before, you've thought about this, but I find in my work, and I think that I think as education is getting out of memorizing content and moving more towards problem solving. And I find that inverse thinking is for me, it's one of the most helpful tools. And it's very simple. It basically just means look at things from the opposite way. Just force yourself to always think about what's the exact opposite. So this was something that a 19th century German mathematician was famous for saying, always invert, 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 always invert. Carl Jacobi was a mathematician, and apparently he always felt like there was no problem that was so difficult that if you didn't look at it from different angles, you couldn't figure it out. It just means looking at a problem from different perspectives. It gives you different insights. Sometimes it makes it look completely different. So for example, if you are investing your money, are you trying to make money or are you trying not to lose your money, right? It's the same thing because you're investing, but looking at it from a different point of view might give you a different outcome. It also might lead you in a different direction, right? How about if you're controlling your diet? Are you trying to control your diet because you want to focus on healthy food or you want to avoid unhealthy food, right? It depends on which one you do. It could take you in a completely different direction. Now, what does it look like for us in sustainability? So here is a company, a local company, very well-respected company. They own airlines, they own buildings, they have a number of different, I won't say the name, but I'm fairly impressed with what they do. They've got a very good sustainability program, but this is pretty typical of what you'll see. Here's from their website. They have something about their waste diversion rates, and you can see that in their Hong Kong portfolio, they divert about 25%, which is about 3,000 tons. They also have some commercial activities in mainland China. And in China, they're diverting about 34.6%, or about 7.5 tons, right? So you look at those numbers and you think, wow, that's pretty impressive, right? If I was to build a new building and I said, this new building is going to have 36%, 35% energy reduction, that sounds great, right? That's energy savings. That's all energy that would not be consumed, which means that's all greenhouse gases that's not being emitted. So let's take this though and practice the invert, right? The inversion. And so if you look at it this one, then 34% diversion means 65% is going to the landfill. 7.5 tons that's diverted, if you do the math, I did the math right, that means that there's 21.9 tons still going to the landfill. Now it doesn't sound quite so good, right? Sometimes looking at it from the opposite side just gives you a different perspective. Now I'm not focusing on what they did not send to the landfill. Now I'm only focusing on what they did. And sometimes that makes you think twice. Here's an example. Here's a Starbucks coffee cup. Starbucks is very important to many of our lives. And a couple of years ago, they started something called Planet Coffee. And they wanted to really showcase that they were doing a lot to improve their environmental performance. And this was one thing that they really focused on. All of their new coffee cups were going to be made with 10% post-consumer recycled fiber. And they had a whole campaign about this. And they said, because of this 10% post-consumer fiber, we are going to save 20,000 trees from being cut down. There's 20,000 trees that will still be alive that wouldn't have been otherwise if we hadn't been doing this. So how do we invert? What does this mean if we invert? Anyone?
90% is the virgin plastic used in making the cup.
Right. Yeah, it's 10% post-consumer, which means that it's 90% not post-consumer consumer. So 90% virgin wood. So if 10% can save 20,000 trees, then how much is 90% actually consuming? Actually, I don't know the math off the top of my head, but you know it's a big number. Right. And so you start to see things, you know, and this is where, for me, this is very important because we have to really be able to ask the right questions. There was a survey that was done a few years ago because there's an area off the shore of Hong Kong where some developers have recognized they can put some offshore wind turbines. And they were worried about whether or not people would be willing to accept this or not. So they said, well, why don't we do a survey? And so they surveyed several thousand people. And the question was, would you be willing to spend up to 5% more on your electricity bill in exchange to be able to support this new renewable energy wind farm? And most people said no. But how about if we were to invert that? What's a way that you could take that and invert it? How would you ask that same question, but kind of in the opposite way?
If I'm not mistaken, maybe use 90% of the energy.
Yeah, you'll be going in that direction. So what I had suggested, the question was this: would you be willing to spend 5% more on your electricity for the wind power? My suggestion was, are you willing to have a 5% discount on your electricity bill in exchange for higher levels of pollution? It's the same question, it's just stated in a slightly different way. And my question probably gets most people to say, no, I don't want to save 5% for more pollution in the air. But if you ask, would you like to spend 5% more for wind turbines? They might say, well, I don't know what wind turbine, why would I care? So, you know, so I've always found that inverting is a good way to try to come at that same problem. And sometimes it just unlocks a different understanding about what it looks like, or what the problem is, or how you might be able to attack it. All right, we're just about out of time. I know we want to say just a little bit in case anyone has any final thoughts. Here are my final thoughts. Just recognize that thinking in the future is not natural. Like, just keep in mind, we're just not designed to do that. The evolution of our brains emphasize perceptive thinking. So we do have to force ourselves sometimes to think, what does the future hold? How can I plan for it? How can I look further into the future than, you know, fixing a problem quickly? We have to overcome the end of history illusion, meaning that, you know, we have to recognize that looking into the future does cause some uncertainty, and that uncertainty makes us think that things will be the same. We know it won't be, so let's just recognize that. And then create opportunities to think backwards, always invert. You know, whatever the question is, try to come at it from the opposite side. And then just to wrap this up, because the whole conversation today has really been about education and higher ed and what does the education of the future look like. I would say that many of you really, I think, nailed it. You talked about how we need to be more cross-disciplinary. We need to be thinking about life being a lifelong learner. This is something that this is a relationship we're going to have with learning for the rest of our lives. Let's embrace that. And universities should start to embrace that as well, is that I'm not giving you a 4-year degree, I'm giving you a career relationship. We talked about the time frame. We talked about how international we're becoming, and that we might be, you know, universities and higher ed might be actually part of a broader collection I think one of the terms was maybe we're more like a tour guide. We're helping people kind of navigate their way around the world and find the kinds of educational resources that they want. Allowing people to mix and match. We'll rely more on partnerships. And I think what it really comes down to is that education really needs to support the need to become, and I love this term, furiously curious. I think that's the key to how we should all be thinking about education. Education isn't to get that degree, you know, it's not about the diploma, it's not about the certificate. It's about unlocking this world so we see it in a bright and beautiful way. And you do that when you're curious, you know, becoming furiously curious is I think I love that. So that's what universities ultimately can do. Reset your mind for deep listening, deep seeing, see things from a different way, a different perspective. All right, any last thoughts or comments? If you completely disagree with anything I said, now's your chance to tell me. Otherwise, I'm going to think that you completely agreed with everything, and that's clearly not the case. Shipra, what is your...
Thank you so much for this amazing talk. I mean, I really enjoyed the whole session here. Now, this is not a disagreement, but rather a question that I have, that sometimes, like, even at present, though like the research institutes and the industries are getting really combined and trying to work together, I still kind of see the gap, because I'm also currently doing an internship, so I kind of see that there's a gap. The thing that, so one of the things I don't think I completely understand always is that the pace that at which we work. So sometimes the work that we do at industry today, I go on and see the research paper. It has been done like 20 years ago. And somehow we cannot maybe go ahead with those things. So I was wondering, like, is that also one of the reasons? Because while working in industry, actually solutions are produced. So it also becomes about the competitive advantage in the present terms. So how do we actually reduce the gap, and how do we also make industries realize that it's really important to be interdisciplinary? Because I have seen like heavy tech-based industries often dismissing policymakers. They are interested in economics, but maybe dismissing the other aspects as well. So those are some of the questions that I always have in my mind.
Well, those are great questions. God, I wish I had the answers for them, because they really are the most important, you know, area. I mean, I think the challenge for us in the future is going to be doing what you're saying, is how, and let me break it down into a couple of pieces. How do we get such a large volume of information distilled in a quick and easy way so that we can distribute it across many different disciplines, and so we're all talking the same language? You know, sometimes we just don't. One thing one of my jobs here is I work so much with researchers. I work with, you know, very brilliant people. And I think, wow, when you're talking to other people in your field, I'm sure they understand every single thing that you say. But when you talk to a regular person, I mean, you might as well be speaking a different language, which is a shame, because you have lots of interesting insights, and they're getting lost because we're just not speaking the same language. And in this case, we're still speaking English, but we're just not speaking the same thing. And so one of my jobs sometimes is to be a translator, you know, and really work with researchers and say, how can I help you take what you're talking about, you're researching, and make it relevant to a policymaker? Because quite frankly, they don't understand what you're talking about, and they don't have the time to try to figure it out. And you know, and I remember actually about 2 or 3 years ago, we had a conference. You know, in Hong Kong, we have a lot of work in mainland China relating to supply chains. You know, so much of the manufacturing is right across the border. And so our business school had a sustainable supply chain conference, and they were, you know, a lot of really interesting, but it was completely filled with academics, which is great. But I kept thinking the academics are not the people who are going to the factories. They're not the ones that are designing the factories. They're not the ones who are working on this. And I remember there was one of our faculty members, very, very well-respected, full professor, and he kind of said, I've had these conversations with some of our industry professionals, and they just don't seem interested. And I thought, that's a big problem. We've got to figure out how to solve that. So maybe you can solve it. Maybe. But I do think it's, and maybe this is where AI can help as well, because there is so much information from 20 years ago, like you started to say this stuff 20 years ago. Half of that stuff is already out of date. How do you figure out if it's out of date or if there's new stuff? I mean, so there's got to be some way to kind of take it all, synthesize it, and then spread it out in a common language where we can all work. So, Federico, you have your hand up.
Hi, Professor. Hello, everyone. I'm Federico from Politecnico di Milano. Thanks for the presentation. And I just don't completely agree with you when you showed the slide with the traditional teaching and the big red cross on it. Because of course it's also someone else was talking about making your own curricula and choosing the different courses from other universities, maybe in this optic of everything is online. So of course is a good thing, and even though kind of challenging, but I also think that it would kind of destroy the human part of being in a classroom with tens, hundreds of people, the communication amongst each other. Like, for example, of course, this Idea League summer school wouldn't have been possible in this time, but at the same time, I couldn't meet you, Professor, in person, for example, and talk with you maybe after the lesson, or I couldn't talk with, I don't know, Ugo, Carlo, Shifra, and all of you guys, and meeting personally and share also the human part and the communication side of the experience of the education in general, in a broad sense. So I just want to discuss how you imagine that. If you agree with the all online, I can just choose among different universities and choose courses. And if you want just to put a big cross, a red cross on the traditional teaching. Yeah.
Okay, no, fair enough. And we'll see what things look like. I think that my point, I agree with you completely that the personal connection is very important, right? If we were all together, let's say if we were all in the same room and we're having this conversation, it would be more enriching, right? If I could look you right in the eye and have this conversation, so there's a real advantage for me being able to have this conversation in Hong Kong when you're in Milan or wherever you are. But that never substitutes for the fact that, we could actually see each other. I do think, though, that what we might find is that if under normal circumstances, if we were all together, then we could have classes and that they would be great. But I think that what you would probably also find is that some of the real value of this program would be during the breaks, right? Or it'd be when this class is over and you go to lunch together and you're sharing some ideas. That part, I agree with you completely. You can't substitute that. So I guess what I'm saying is the classroom, I think, is kind of dispensable. The other parts of that social fabric is not, and so we need to figure out how we can really emphasize the pieces that really build that good social cohesion, that we get something really great out of. And then the other things that we can do easier just by, some learning modules, let's do elements in place of different types of scenarios that could happen, and you can kind of plot it out and you can say, well, if this is what happens, then this is where we'll be and this is what we'll do. And if this is what happens, then we'll be in this, and then this is what we do, and you can kind of plan out 4 or 5 different strategies for 4 or 5 different scenarios based on if the factors certain things go up or certain things go down or certain things happen. There's something called backcasting, is that you start to work your way backwards. A number of you have talked about electric vehicles. Okay, so we all kind of know that electric vehicles are the way. I mean, the electric drivetrain is clearly superior. We know that that's going to happen. So, there are certain things that we know, and then you could start to say, all right, well, by 2030, well, how many electric vehicles do we think we're going to have? If we're going to have, let's say, 50% of the cars coming on campus are electric, how many chargers do we need to be able to serve, 50%? What does it mean? Are we going to prioritize where they park? Are we going to, look at creating some kind of incentive to try to encourage that, so that by 2030, more and more people are doing that? So there are different ways that you can try to, plan. You can never plan perfectly, but you start to feel much more comfortable when you start to think your way through what are the different scenarios, and then am I prepared for it? And if you feel like you're prepared for it, then it just opens up a little bit more confidence.